So again, welcome everybody to Nova Scribes. I am super excited to introduce Gina Weatherup. Gina, I don't have your bio right in front of me, so I'm just going to speak off the cuff. One of the things I know about Gina is that she specializes in managing and dealing with conflict. Not only is she an amazing facilitator, but she also is a certified mediator with one of our local municipalities here in the Northern Virginia area. And I wanted to have this session with her because number one, she's super amazing. But number two, facilitation has a conceit that's built into it. There's an assumption, and often this assumption is wrong, that the people that we get together in a room want to achieve an outcome. And sometimes when we get into these group sessions, we find that not everybody here wants to achieve the same ends, and it's not necessarily in their interest to come up with one common outcome. So that's why Gina and I wanted to get together and present this to you. She and I are going to be kind of ping-ponging back and forth of some techniques that she and I have both picked up as visuals and resources for managing conflict. So Gina, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. I am actually typing furiously into the chat because I want to share my slides link. So I will, oh, thank you. Awesome. You have that going on right there. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'm a certified mediator in the state of Virginia. I'll show up occasionally to the courthouse in Fairfax County or Loudoun County and help people resolve conflict. In my private practice, working with businesses, I do mediation, particularly between co-leaders to try to help them get back onto the same page. Brian, you surprised me, so I guess I'm just going to ask you to go to the next slide. I want to do a check-in, and you can go to the next slide. I'm actually going to invite everybody who's in the Google Slides to grab a icon. You have a choice of several different types along the side and move it on over. So what we're looking at here is a emotions quadrant, and the y-axis is energy. We've got high energy up top, low energy at the bottom, and then the x-axis is actually usually called pleasure. And since I do this with professional audiences, I've kind of renamed it as not so good and very good, but usually psychologists try to avoid labeling good or bad on emotions, right? All emotions have their place. So I like to use this sometimes with managers to give them an opportunity to see, like, you can get the feel of the room by asking people, well, how are you feeling? And instead of putting somebody on the spot to name an emotion or hearing, fine, I'm fine, fine, how are you? Fine, fine, we're all fine. You can get a sense of people's energy levels and if they're in kind of a good mood, bad mood, in the middle here. So I'm seeing things move around. Thank you for indulging me. And I always like it when people pick like the appropriate icon, right? Like someone is not having a good day and you chose the frowny face. And someone else is maybe having a slightly better day, but not great. And they've got like the thundercloud, right? We had thunderstorms in a few different places across the country last night. Let me interrupt myself. Brian mentioned if you come off mute, we will go to you and say, what's up? Please feel free to just speak up and interrupt me as I'm talking. I do not mind at all hearing, excuse me, Gina, and I will pause. So would anyone like to say anything about where you chose to put your icon? Totally optional. Okay. And this is exactly how I facilitate this. It's completely optional. I do often see people choosing the sort of positive side here, right? Because we're doing professional things. People are feeling like I have to look a certain way, and we kind of see that skew. Haven't tried this yet in the mediation, but really want to. Brian, you can go, I think, 2 slides down and show off the next bit.
Yeah, so this is something that if you've ever facilitated with me, you've probably seen it. This is along the same lines as what Gina just shared. This is called the mood meter, and you can think of it as a periodic table of emotions. It comes to us from Dr. Mark Brackett, who's the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor at the Yale Child Study Center. This actually comes from his book, Permission to Feel, which I believe he intended to help children become a little bit more in touch with their feelings. And let me just say, I use this all the time with grown-ups. And so the way that it works is that you, first of all, you decide if you are in the high or low energy side of things. And for me, it's about 5 o'clock, on a Tuesday. So my energy might be a little bit lower. And then you decide on your degree of pleasantness. Are you high or low pleasantness? So first you pick the quadrant that you're in, and then you do some fine tuning. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is to decide where you are and to go ahead and drop your mood into Zoom chat. So decide what mood are you in and go ahead and drop it in. So Lori, the mood meter is not open source, but there are so many different versions of it out there, open on the internet. I'm sure you can find. This is a version of it that I designed myself, and I'm happy to share this one. So mellow, thoughtful, content, excited, playful, thoughtful, hopeful, down, festive, focused, tired. Yep, it's 5 o'clock on a Tuesday. No judgment. Kelly, same thing. Tired, hopeful. And as Mateo said earlier in the chat, emotions are just data and all data is good. Oh, it is Wednesday. I've been saying that all day. I've been thinking it was Tuesday. David, of course, as he always wants to do, I think this is the only reason he wants to join Nova Scribes is to get into a conflict with Brian. So as Mateo said a second ago, emotions are just data and all data is good. And so when you take this in, this tells you something. This is a way, especially if you're doing this online, that you can check in with the groups. Okay. Gina, can I throw it back over to you?
Absolutely. Go on down to the next couple of slides. Like Brian said, I'm a mediator, and I actually have more years of experience in facilitation than mediation, but I love mediation because it gives me a very specific process to help people in conflict muddle their way through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mediation tonight, and the way that I use it. Depending on time, at the end of our presentation, we have sort of a choose your own adventure if we still have lots of time to play with. So if you're really, really curious about mediation, I can absolutely take questions. But we do have some other information about conflicts we want to be able to share with you. One question that I have, and Brian, you can go to the next slide and the one after, is have you ever worked with a mediator? And then if you've got the slides up that you're accessing yourself, you can this time grab a check mark and put it over wherever fits.
So I'm noticing in chat while people
Oh,
are
hey,
moving that
Donna.
around.
How's
Yeah.
it going? We'll have to talk sometime.
Oops.
Cool. Usually I wind up seeing lots of check marks under yes, personal. And whenever I tell people I'm a mediator, they assume I do divorce, which I don't do. Donna, do you do divorce?
It's a thumbs up. And Donna,
Yeah,
feel free to,
do.
if there's something that we touch on that you've got some experience in,
You
feel free to
speak up,
chime in.
definitely. Cool. College roommates don't count. No. Facilitator divorce, that is a special thing.
That's just DMP being DMP.
You'll be leaving early for a scheduled, well, good luck with the mediation. I hope that, but I have to say, sometimes when I leave a mediation, the only thing I can think is people are fascinated. I don't know if you feel that way, Don. All right, let's go on down. Thank you for sharing about whether or not you've worked with a mediator. It looks like most people haven't. So what are the objectives for tonight? In a moment, I'm going to ask what you would most like to learn, but we're hoping to cover visual tools for exposing, containing, channeling the raw energy of conflict, why good processes go off the rails, practice some mid-course corrections, learn some methods of prevention, learn to diffuse the high flock conflict conversations before they happen. Sometimes that's not really possible, but we can make attempts. And also, this is one of the keys for me that ties together mediation and facilitation, how to use your neutral presence as an instrument to help people, right? Whether we're channeling anger and fear into inspiration and appreciation, or just maybe simplifying something, helping someone to hear something that they can't quite grasp because they're stuck in a high conflict mode. So let's go down one more slide. This is another jump in and tell us, although please, if you want to come off mute and share verbally, what do you most want us to cover tonight? And tip for the Google slide, put a little space before you actually start to type, or hit the enter or return key so that you're not typing over someone else. The visual tools for mediation. Okay, cool. One thing I haven't done yet that I want to try sometime is I'm a newer mediator, so I do a lot of co-mediation. So that's why I haven't done it. But I really want to use that emotional check-in thing in a mediation sometime and see how that goes. Best practices when people get triggered. Yeah, diffuse the conflict. Sitting with the conflict. So one thing I find myself thinking every time I facilitate is I'm always advising my clients that it's okay that things will be messy. We have to work on the mess. We have to work through the messiness to get to something that might look like a consensus or a goal or whatever it may be. So many things to cover. Maybe we should do a series on conflict. I love the all caps. How to let a group sit with their conflict to become better aware of where they are without panicking inside. I understand panicking happens to mediators too. And helps the group avoid panicking. While being your neutral and partial self can help with that too, right? If you're not panicking or if you don't look like you're panicking, other people will think you've got it all together. Isn't that a lovely thing? And process the gist of coming up with visuals for this work. Cool. All right. Let's move forward and we'll see how many of these we can tackle. And we've got a little over an hour. Well, I wanted to start off talking to you about mediation, and we can come on down. Brian, I talked through the slides fairly quickly. Basically, you hit a point where you just need a neutral person. You're so in the conflict, or the other person is so in the conflict, or you're observing people who are so in the conflict, you can't see what's going to happen, right? You can't find your way out of it. A lot of times I tell people, if you're losing sleep at night, then you should consider a mediator, right? There's no harm in giving a mediator a call, talking about the situation at least a little bit. A lot of mediators try not to get into a lot of the details because we want to maintain our neutrality. But anytime you think, gosh, I wish like I could see like the other perspective or get a neutral perspective on this, you want to make a phone call for a mediator. Let's do the next slide. There's actually 3 different types of mediation. There's 2 in particular that I always like to highlight: facilitative versus evaluative. So I'm a facilitative mediator. And Donna, if you want to share anything about the type of mediation you do, please go ahead and share that in the chat. Facilitative mediators are very much focused on the process of mediation and the way we're talking to each other, right? The communication process. An evaluative mediator goes through the same mediation process, but they're actually listening to give some advice. So a mediator will never tell you what to do. We're not the judge, we're not an arbitrator. Actually, a lot of mediators happen to be lawyers, but they're barred from giving legal advice in a mediation. But if you're an evaluative mediator, you've been hired because of your expertise in a given subject matter. And you're going to say, well, look, from my perspective, being the neutral third party here, given what I know about whatever the subject matter may be, maybe it's finances, maybe it's splitting up a business, maybe it's something else. This is the path forward I would suggest, but it's still voluntary. Okay, that's the key. In terms of professional mediations, there are interpersonal mediations, which is what I do. They're in the workplace, but it's about 2 people who aren't getting along. And there's contracts. A lot of people who do mediation are familiar with it from a labor relations side, right? Unions and companies, they need to mediate to figure out what the next contract is going to look like. So mediators do that as well. And Donna, oh, we have Caroline in the house too. Cool. Both doing facilitative. Donna, do you mind sharing a little bit about the transformative leaning? Because I don't know a lot about transformative mediation. I believe you, if you don't mind coming off mute, or you can put it in chat. I believe if you're a transformative mediator, you're focused on healing a relationship. Is that right?
Yes, my training is in restorative justice. And so that healing aspect of it is something that I bring into mediation. And
Excellent.
so that's why I sort of think of it as more transformative than.
I love that.
So it's not to get to an agreement or some kind of written document, but really to address the harm that's been caused.
Yeah, so extremely different from me showing up to a small claims court. You're really focusing on helping two people to feel like they can have that relationship, right?
I do a huge amount of court work though.
Yeah.
But I can't take away my restorative justice, just experience, and also it ekes in no matter whether I want it to or not.
Donna, I would actually love to follow up with you offline on a case that I had recently. Let's go forward to what to look for if you ever find yourself considering hiring a mediator. You're going to look for training and experience. Here's the thing. No one, as far as I've been able to figure out anywhere in the country, is required to have specific training or certifications to call themselves a mediator in private practice. However, lots of states do require that if you're going to take court cases, you have to go through a specific certification process. So that's what I've done here in Virginia. I guess Donna has, it looks like Caroline has. And what that usually looks like, and what it does look like here in Virginia, is classroom training. It's about between 4 and 5 days long, I believe. And then you go through a mentorship process where you're actually co-mediating with other more experienced mediators who've been trained in how do you mentor a mediator. So I loved that, even though I was pretty sure from the beginning that I wasn't as interested in the legal system. I wanted to do workplace mediation. I knew I could do that in private practice. I wanted the training wheels, and I wanted to know from other people who've been doing this for, in some cases, several decades, how they were reading a situation, what tips they would give me, what tools they would use at different times. So you're always going to ask people, well, how did you learn to become a mediator? If they're not certified, maybe they still have experience, but maybe ask if they've ever gone through a classroom training. If you are dealing with a certified mediator, you can feel also sort of extra confident working with them, because we are required, in order to maintain certification, to recertify every 2 years. And that's not about number of cases. That's to say, look at these credits. I've sat in these classes. I've, done these things. Thank you, Donna. All right, so let's get into talking about conflict. And I wanted to just sort of define conflict really broadly, next slide, as it's just, and you all know this, there's more than one idea about what should be happening. That's a conflict, right? So sometimes I like to use the word disagreement, because sometimes that feels a little less loaded. And if we come down to the next slide, this is again inviting you to share, what do you think are some pros of having a conflict? What are some cons of having a conflict? Oh, I love when I see so many pros. Usually everyone's giving me cons. See, you all know this. Diverse ideas. Ooh, relationship building. I'd love to hear more about that. Expose blind spots. Is damaged relationships purposefully upside down, or was there a Google goof? Yikes.
There's a conflict with our Google Doc.
There is a
Can
conflict.
I fix it?
Yes. Yes, you may. Thank you.
Stand by.
Yeah.
Done.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you would like to say more about anything that you've written on the screen, you can absolutely do so in the chat or come off mute and talk with us. Like I said, I'd love to hear more about whoever shared relationship building. That one isn't quite intuitive for me. I like that we see on the pro side, self-expression, progress can be constructive. You see your blind spots.
I put relationship building. It's your friend Lauren.
But why? How does conflict lead to relationship building?
If you experience positive conflict, you have the opportunity to get close with someone, and it can build trust in a way that nothing else can, other than that common experience.
Absolutely. I love that. It's sort of, I almost feel like we need to reference Brene Brown, right? You've got to get vulnerable to share your own self-expression, and then like you can move forward and build trust from there, right? Because you've decided that I can be safely vulnerable with this person. On the other side, the thing that stops us is this con here that I just highlighted. People tend to be uncomfortable with conflict, right? And someone was writing something about fear. It may have gotten reworded, but there's really intense emotions around conflict, right? So people are sort of worried and they don't want to share, or they get angry. And then instead of being able to say something constructively or sharing a new perspective, you wind up just insulting people, which is something mediators have to deal with. We have to think, how can I reframe that insult to get to the heart of what you actually said? Because there's a kernel in there that we have to talk about, right?
Yeah. Lori, did you have a thought?
I was just going to say I think that there's a lot of people that are aware of all of the positives of conflict. And I think that some of the folks that I've facilitated where conflict has come up, particularly in a facilitated session, the challenge is that you don't have the opportunity to really kind of totally hold the space for it, especially in this kind of, the chiclet world of Zoom meetings. And people do actually come out of some conflicts that, you actually get to a positive resolution, but people do get PTSD and fear from some of the work.
Yeah.
And I think it's just important to acknowledge that there are real trade-offs, and trying to decide when to really, when conflict comes up, to do a facilitator Aikido thing and let the opportunity for all those positives go by, perhaps knowing that it's going to be really hard to provide the kind of support that really will bring those positives to life.
There's so much gold in what you're sharing there, Lori. I want to thank you and absolutely acknowledge that sometimes you just get PTSD from previous conflicts, right? Previous disagreements that you felt perfectly comfortable talking about and moving into, sort of, and then it backfires and you get attacked. And then the next time a conflict comes up, you're like, nope, I don't need to be sharing what I think, right? But also the way you set that up, I wonder, Brian, maybe we should actually go ahead and skip down to the approaches to conflict, where Brian's going to draw our TKI.
Okay, love it. So just quick show of hands while I'm getting this queued up. Who here has worked with the TKI, the Thomas Kilmann conflict? Okay, so I'm going to introduce it to you. And if you've seen this already, awesome. But then I'm going to talk about like how to use it as a lens in order to diagnose a conflict that may be happening in the meeting that you've got. And so it is, like all great things, it's a 2-axis model. And along the vertical axis, by the way, this would be a great opportunity for you all to do some sketch noting or some visual note taking. You have assertiveness. Okay.
Brian, we have a question from Chris.
Yeah, what's the question? I'm not seeing it.
No, there's no question. I just forgot to put my hand back down. I've heard of Thomas Kilmann before.
Oh, no problem. And let me, while I'm thinking of it, let me label it. So it's Thomas Kilmann. And by the way, these are 2 separate guys. It's not one guy named Thomas Kilmann. It's Thomas and then, whoops, and I even spelled it wrong. But there you go. Okay. No, I got it right. Thomas Kilmann, conflict instrument, if you ever give somebody the assessment for it. Okay. And there is a pretty good tool that goes along with it, also known as the TKI, which it will tell you what somebody's preferences are. So on the vertical, you've got the assertiveness, and then on the horizontal, you've got cooperativeness. Now, these are kind of cooperativeness. You'd think after all this time, I'd be able to write and talk at the same time. These are kind of highfalutin terms. Let me give you another way of thinking about this. Rather than saying assertiveness, you could say, how important is the issue to you? And either it's very important or it's not all that important. And then rather than cooperativeness, it's how important is the relationship to you. Okay. And either low or high. And let's start with the easy one. The way that most people define conflict is high assertiveness, high on the issue, low on the relationship, and that is where we're going to compete. Now, if we're competing, this is A versus B, okay? This is my way or the highway. This is you're either getting on the bus or you're not getting on the bus, and either there's going to be a winner or there's going to be a loser, but we're not going to both come out of this a winner. So you see examples of this all throughout history. War is an example of a competition. Elections are a competition. Okay, so that's a compete. Where we go down to low assertiveness and low cooperativeness, this is where we might do some avoiding. Okay, and again, this is where the issue, it's not that important to me, and the relationship, also not that important to me. So here's A in this case, and B is nowhere to be seen. That's like, where are they? They're just not even there. Now, I'll talk about how this shows up a little bit later, but in our modern world, if the issue is not all that important to me and the relationship is not all that important to me, I may not respond to your email. I may not even address this thing. I might not show up at the meeting. So that's how avoiding tends to show up. In the middle, right between all of these really, is the idea of compromise. And so this would be A starts over here, B starts over here, and they work their way towards some sort of middle ground. So for example, if let's say that Lori Durnell is my boss, and she has been on occasion. If Lori is my boss, I go to my boss and say, hey boss, I'd like to leave at 3 o'clock today. And she says, well, Brian, you signed up to work until 5 o'clock. Let's compromise. Let's make it 4 o'clock. That is a compromise. Okay. Let's go down to the lower right-hand corner. And if the relationship is important to you, but the issue not so much, then it's likely you're going to be in, oh, look at that. It's likely that you're going to be in, come on, computer, accommodate mode. And what that means is that here's A, and if you're B, you basically let A get their way. If you've ever seen my wife and I try to decide where we're gonna go eat on a Friday night, both of us do a lot of accommodating. Do you want to go to Taco Bell? Sure, Taco Bell's fine. Let's go to Taco Bell, whatever, that works. And the reason for it is that the issue is not all that important, but the relationship is really important. And then finally, the last mode is collaborate, okay? Now, in the context of the model, can't talk and draw at the same time, collaborate. In the context of the model, this is not just about two people working together. We do a lot of work in government here in Northern Virginia. Often they talk about two agencies need to collaborate with each other. That's not what this means. This isn't just working together. This is A and B working together to come up with something that neither one of them could have thought of before on their own. This is A plus B equals star. And so back to the example of Lori and I go into my boss, I say, hey, Lori, can I leave at 3 o'clock today? And she says, well, why do you want to leave at 3 o'clock? Well, I've got some childcare issues. There's nobody at home to watch the kids. And she says, well, how about you just work from home? That way you're able to ostensibly take care of your kids or keep an eye on them, and I get my solid 8 hours. Well, that's better for both of us, right? Because I'm happy and I'm going to give a solid 8 hours. She's happy because I give the solid 8 hours, and I'm happy because I get to watch my kids. Okay, so even if you are familiar with the model, here is how to use it in the context of a high conflict meeting. This is a diagnostic tool in the sense that you can use this as a way to figure out where are people showing up in this model. Are they in compete mode, collaborate mode, compromise mode, avoid mode, or accommodate? And if they are, what you can do is you can actually take a moment and draw this out on a flip chart or, on a Cintiq like what I'm doing. But present it as a lens to diagnose whatever the conflict is that's happening in the room. And what this does is that it provides an objective lens to get onto the balcony of whatever the conflict is and say, what are we doing right now? Are we competing? Are we avoiding? What should we be doing? And by the way, this is not a valuative model. People often assume that collaborate, well, that's always where we should be. The truth is it's not. Collaboration takes a long time. It takes a solid, intact, high-performing team in order to be able to get to collaboration. It takes established norms. There are times when you're going to want to compete. Lauren and I were just having a conversation around ethics, where we were asked to do something that by our lens was a little bit unethical. So we said, we are absolutely not doing this thing. That was a compete. The issue was important to us and the relationship was important to us. So when I say you can use this as a prescriptive model, here's what I mean. You put it in front of your group and you say, all right, how important is this issue to you? How important is the relationship to you? And given that, where should you be? If the issue is really important, if the relationship's really important, then that means we need to be in collaborate mode. Okay. All right. I haven't been keeping an eye on chat. I'm wondering if there's any questions coming in. Laura, you got anything? I notice you're off mute. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay. Just making sure.
We've been chatting in the chat about actually interesting things, mostly about TKI. And I shared one of the many locations online. You can purchase an assessment if you want to. We talked about easier ways to do it sort of without pay, similar to the way that you just laid that out. David is bringing up the question of contracting for conflict, which is an interesting one we can take some time with. Cultural issues. My comment in the chat, Brian, was that sort of the secret, I think, of the TKI is that every single mode is appropriate for different situations.
Exactly.
You only sort of get into trouble if you're using one all the time.
Right. And if it's a good idea for you as, I think, just as a human being, let alone a facilitator or a mediator, to take a look at this model, even if you haven't done the assessment, to say, okay, how do I typically show up? Where's my sweet spot? And then what's my secondary? Because we usually have two. If you take the TKI, it'll usually say, here's your primary, here's your secondary,
Yep.
and then most of the rest are pretty low, right? If you've got some low ones, consider how might you develop those, or what would happen if you tried those out. I will tell you, mine tends to be high compete and then high compromise. That's just where I land. I got an email not too long ago from a client who was unhappy with my work. The reason they were unhappy with my work is that it got back to an ethical thing. I was asked to do something during a facilitation that I considered unethical. I chose not to do it. Basically, what I was asked to do was move stickies around during a break to reflect a discussion that actually hadn't happened, to put decisions on the board. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. We can come back from break and talk about it more later, but I can't do that for you right now. So the facilitation ends. I get this email. I've already decided I don't want to work with these people anymore. My tendency is to go back and defend myself. That's competing. But I looked at the model. And it's like, okay, how important is this issue to me? Not really. Okay. I really don't want to be working with these folks anymore, which also tells me where it is with the relationship. And so I avoided. I didn't answer the email. That really sat on me for a long time. I had to not just delete it, I had to go into the trash and like double delete it. You know how you can do that thing? Just because it's like I couldn't sleep at night for this unanswered email. But the point is that if you use the model, not just with your clients, but also with yourself, you can actually develop a little bit more agility as a facilitator and as a mediator.
And by the way, the TKI is highly personal. It's about you being in conflict. So like when I'm mediating, none of these things really apply to me. They apply to the people that I'm mediating with, right? But it's not my conflict. That doesn't mean that I don't compete or avoid, right? I do those things that we label as sometimes bad ways to deal with conflict, sometimes because then those are my conflicts and I really care about them. But with the people that I'm mediating, it's their issue, which is actually, I want to use that as the segue, go down a few slides to number 29, Brian.
Sure.
And I hope that this starts to get at some of the questions we're hearing about, like, but what do you do about like the elephant in the room and when you're facilitating a group and there's conflict? For me, it's all about getting really curious. And sometimes this is in front of the full group that I'm facilitating. It's like, I'm seeing a thing and what's going on here. And sometimes, depending on the situation, it might be like, we're taking a break and let me go up to one person and say, okay, I'm really curious about this. And come down to the next slide. It's, for me, the curiosity piece, the way that I get there is because I'm trying to engage my empathy skills, right? Because there's two different types of empathy. There's the empathy we always think of, right? Like I think of the stereotype of the mom crying at the Hallmark commercial. It's sort of involuntary. I'm feeling what someone else is feeling. And that is part of what can make conflicts difficult, because one person's angry, another person starts to feel angry too. But we can engage the sort of cognitive part of our brains to just try to take someone else's perspective. And actually, research is showing that that is also empathy in our brains. It's very similar pathways to try to take someone else's perspective. So the next couple of slides sort of try to just illuminate that a little bit. It's about deepening understanding. And when I'm working with teams, it's about building camaraderie, right? Helping people to feel safer to express their perspective because they're seeing other people trying to be informed about their perspective. So for me, that the main skill for all of this is active listening. Let's pause for a second and just kind of take some questions. I see stuff happening in the chat that I've stopped paying attention to.
Oh, we're just having a conversation about visual metaphors for conflict. And there's been some good ones. I don't know if there was a missed question though. That's
okay. Brian, do you want to start talking about the 4 ways of seeing then? Is that a good visual metaphor?
Yeah, I would love to. It's not a visual metaphor, but it's another lens. And that's one of the things that we're going to share a lot with you are these frameworks, these tools, these models, so that you can, again, zoom out from the conflict and hand it to your participants to say, if you were to look at what's happening in the room now through this lens, how could you become the scientist? How could you become the conflict scientist and get a lens on what's happening here from an objective perspective? So the next one that I want to share with you is actually called the 4 ways of seeing. And it comes to us from the Army Red Team School, okay? It's like all good things. It's also got a 2x2 to it. And it kind of goes like this. So how X sees X, how Y sees Y, how X sees Y, and then how Y sees X. And so you'd sketch this up on a flip chart, and you have the group pull out some descriptors of these things. And so if we were to take, I'm trying to think of a safe conflict that we might be able to look at that's not too politically charged right now. Does somebody have an example of a historical conflict that we can talk about without getting some feelings hurt? Lauren, what is it?
Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr.
Okay. Wow. You're gonna stretch my understanding of that conflict.
Yeah, me too. I don't really remember it. I just really love the musical.
All right, fine. So we've got Alexander Hamilton. Let's see if this works. Hamilton's gonna be X and Aaron Burr is gonna be Y. Okay. So how would you say that Alexander Hamilton saw himself in that whole conflict? Boy, I hope somebody's read the book. Any thoughts here?
Hamilton
Gina?
is the hero. Hamilton is always the hero of his own story.
The hero of the story. Okay. Anything else? How else does he see himself?
Smartest guy in the room.
Okay, smart. Probably defending of free markets, if I remember that right.
Yep.
And if I remember, it was Aaron Burr was more of a Jeffersonian, if I got that right. Chris?
This thing's got to get his shots.
Get his shots.
Hamilton wants to get his shots.
Just got to get not throwing away my
Burr
shot.
is more like, I'm not going to make waves. I'm going to help people. I'm going to wait and see how things are going and where the popular opinion is.
No waves, wait and see.
And then that's what I'm going to talk about.
And he
Okay.
was humble. He tried to be humble in his decision making.
Okay, so remember, this is how they see
Really?
themselves, right?
Humble?
Ah, so now we're getting into how X
Ah.
sees Y. So let's play with this a little bit. How does Alexander Hamilton see Aaron Burr? That's this one.
Is an opportunist.
Okay, opportunist. Let's do the Hamilton sees Burr. Opportunist. How else?
What Kelly said in the chat, talk less, smile more.
Okay.
Wishy-washy.
I meant
Yes.
Burr sees Hamilton as an opportunist. I'm sorry.
Burr sees Hamilton as an opportunist. Okay, let me switch this up a little bit. How does Burr see Hamilton? And let me just correct this. Okay, so this is H for Hamilton, B for Burr. And if somebody could read to me in chat, it's kind of difficult for me to see that.
So for how Hamilton sees Hamilton, Ludi said, just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry.
Young, scrappy,
then-
hungry. Okay,
Yeah. Aaron Burr's motto, Kelly is sharing, is talk less, smile more.
that's what he says. Okay, so that may be how he
Mhm.
sees himself. Talk
Yeah.
less, smile more. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Rachel, you're absolutely right. This is definitely history through a fictional musical.
Yep.
That's sure.
How would you say that Hamilton then sees Burr?
Hamilton looks at Burr as even what we today would consider like the consummate politician. Like he will switch sides at the drop of a hat. And yeah.
Okay.
He sees him as too slow, too patient, not taking action.
Okay. Inactive.
Mm.
Inaction. Okay. And let's flip it. How does Burr see Hamilton? We already got opportunist. How else?
Trigger happy.
Trigger happy. Okay. How else? Any other ideas?
Stubborn and unwilling to compromise.
Stubborn, unwilling to compromise. Okay. Okay, so again, this one's called the 4 ways of seeing. And then obviously what you do, you don't just do the activity with folks. What you do is you take them through this and you say, okay, well, what does that mean? And this is one that can quickly lead a group to building empathy and understanding in each other. Okay. And what's helpful is that if you're doing with a group where, in this case, Hamilton and Burr are in the same room together, not necessarily name people, but to say, let's take a look at these two positions, right? We're not going to actually put people's names on that because that's going to be a little bit too aggressive. But to say, you know, the folks that are in favor of option H, what do we think that their rationale is? And the idea is to engage everyone in the intellectual exercise of pulling them from the conflict into understanding each other's perspectives. Chris, did you have a thought on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to say another way of doing it is to have them actually take each other's positions and describe it as like a role play.
Yeah, this is really related to that one. This one just has a visual template. So yeah, that's right. Okay. Kelly says, can you explain what you mean by not naming the roles? Yes, what I'm trying to say here is that rather than focus on the name, which in this case would be Hamilton, it would be, I hope I'm getting this right. We would say, well, let's take a look at the Federalist perspective. So what we're doing is that we're actually depersonalizing it. Rather than it being about the person, it's about the position. Kelly, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes way more sense now. Thanks.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question on that?
Yeah, please.
How would you intro that so that people are willing to do this? If you like are trying to say cross interdepartmental lines, you don't want to say like, well, team A wants this and team B wants that.
Yeah. You mean at the very beginning, the introduction to something like this?
Yeah, how do you
So
bring it up to the group?
yeah, so Gina, feel free to weigh in. I'll tell you how I do it. I'd say I'm noticing that there's a lot of energy around this topic. I don't often say conflict because of that actually has some triggers to it. I'm noticing that there's a lot of energy around this particular issue. I'd like to introduce a tool that I've found helpful as a way of diagnosing different sides of an issue, and as a way of building empathy and understanding when there is energy for and against an idea. So I might cue it up just like that. And then I would just grab a marker and draw this thing. And exactly the same way that we worked it with Hamilton and Burr, I would put the onus of filling out what's in each one of those squares on my participants. So I'm looking to them to give me the content that's underneath this thing. The act of that of actually doing that has a way of pulling people out of the conflict and gaining some objective distance so that they can actually look at it and appreciate each other's perspective. Gina, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, and I was just thinking in terms of Kelly's framing of the question, like if you've got two different departments and they're kind of competing, usually there's a reason behind that, right? Like if it's sales and marketing, broadly from the outside, you could be like, well, you're both responsible for like leads and sales, right? So like you should work together, but a lot of times they don't work together. So I would kind of bring it back to what is the goal here? What's the point of this meeting? Why do you need to care about working together well, right? And sometimes in the work that I do, it's actually about like naming the stress in the room, right? Like people are working really hard and there's a lot of stress around this, but I think maybe we can find a way to calm it down if we take a step back, right? And how I would handle that individually versus in a group is a little bit different. One of the greatest questions, and we do have this in the slides too to share, that I can think of that was actually shared with me by another mediator is, and you don't necessarily use it with more than one person, you just kind of look at the one person who you're trying to help like access their empathy and just say, okay, well, let's just pretend for a minute that this other person is just as wonderful, smart, kind, rational, hardworking as you are. What do you think could be going on for them that would make them say that, think that, behave that way? Right? So you're taking them aside individually and you're asking them verbally to kind of take a step back and switch the perspective, right? Like, let's just, I know you've called this person names, but let's just pretend for a minute that they are someone who is very similar to you and they're, a good person at heart. What could be going on for them to make them behave that way? Yeah. And most of the time, people, even sort of sometimes begrudgingly, like they'll go there with me, right? They're like, well, maybe it was this, or well, I heard he was going through that. Then you can have a very different kind of a conversation.
Lori, did you have a question, comment?
No, I was actually going to make a comment that I've added a column. I've done something like this where I've split the groups into the two groups. And the question is, how do we see them? And then, how do we see ourselves? How do we see them? And then how do we think they see us? Is the other question that I ask. And so what's actually really quite interesting then is to then bring those two groups back together to have a conversation. And as long as the conflict isn't really huge and high, sometimes there's a lot of laughter, which is always great when you're in some conflict situations. So that's another way of revealing to each other what it is that's going on in your brains.
Thanks for that, Lori.
I'm going to have to go, but I just wanted to interject something here. This is Donna. I see this happening so often and learn some things about it, but we all have our place where we get stuck either in the past, the present, or the future. So what I so much of the time see in the mediations that I do is one of the parties needs to have the past cleaned up, like the hurt that was calls, and there's one in the future going, we can't change any of that stuff. We just need to figure out how we're going to do such and such. And so it's really painful for the person who hears that, that's in the past, that needs some things cleaned up or forgiven, or what, you know, understood or whatever. And so they can feel really, you know, additionally hurt or traumatized, or, you know, what depending on what's going on, when a person disregards their need to move forward. And then can be people who's like, we need to figure out what we need to do today. We can't think about tomorrow until we figured out what we're going to do today. And so if you can pull yourself back and listen to everybody, you can figure out where they're stuck in the past, present, or future, to be able to figure out how to use some of these things effectively as well. And thank you all. I'm going to have to scoot because I have some people to meet with in a few minutes.
Thanks, Anna.
Other questions, comments people want to share? In the chat, there's a lot of going back and forth on visual metaphors. Caroline was mentioning having two groups list the strengths of each other's arguments. Lauren was talking about nonviolent communication, articulating the things we fear others are judging us for. Thank you. Brian, if you can go down just to the very next slide. I find myself, I just think the concept of curiosity is so incredibly useful when I'm trying to access my own empathy for other people or help people access empathy. And with teams, if people can be genuinely curious about why people are behaving the way they are, a lot of times this can wind up kind of getting into a higher productivity, because instead of immediately going to judging, you're asking questions and trying to learn, right? Go down to the next slide. There's more and more research that says that the best way that we can pick up on emotions is actually through tone of voice, as opposed to visual cues in terms of body language. So to show genuine curiosity, because you can ask a question in all kinds of ways that can be very judgmental, right? And I think as facilitators, you all know how to do this. If you watch your tone of voice, if you say things as neutrally as you can, you're actually communicating more neutrally. You're communicating curiosity to people, and they're more willing to open up because they feel like you're interested in them. So from there, I wanted to go to some of the go-to questions that I like to recommend to people when you're in a conflict, right? And we can slide through these slides pretty quickly. It's really thinking about, what can I learn? What can the group or the team learn if I'm facilitating people here? Always ask, am I making an assumption? And then what are those assumptions, right? And so sometimes if I'm facilitating, or mediating, both situations, I will actually say to folks, okay, I'm new to this situation and I'm kind of assuming some things based on what I'm hearing. So I'm going to share what my assumptions are, and you all need to correct me when I get something wrong. And I will, of course, try to phrase those in as neutral a way as possible, or as kind a way as possible. But verbalizing those, even if you're only doing it for yourself when you're in conflict, can be really, really helpful. Come on down. Yeah. What are the facts, which sometimes can be loaded with groups, right? But it is a good question to ask. You know, in mediation, oftentimes you're looking for something that is almost tangible when we think about facts, right? Like if it's a performance management issue and one of the issues is this employee is constantly late, right? You're like, okay, well, what does late mean? Is there a system where that gets tracked? You know, like, what are you talking about here? So you're kind of trying to get to the heart of it in terms of something that might be verifiable. I love this. It's always about the goal. So as particularly, and we do this all the time with facilitations, right? We want to ask the people who are hiring us to facilitate, what's the point of the meeting? What's your goal? How would you define success? When it's a mediation, I'm asking the two parties, what do you think a solution could be? And sometimes I'll take parties aside individually and ask them, okay, so tell me really, what's your goal here, right? Like as a manager, as an employee, as a co-owner of a business, or as somebody suing somebody at small claims, like what do you really want here? Because that can help me identify what their underlying interests are and start to figure out a path forward. So what works and what's possible. So I liked when Donna was talking about like people getting stuck in the past, the present, or the future. Oftentimes with mediation, you're really leading people from the past to the future. You know, there's this issue identification stage where you're asking them what got you to this point where you had to talk to a mediator. And then you sort of establish what happened in the past as well as where people are right now. And then you're actually asking them to switch to a future focus and brainstorm some ideas. So you get the past out in order to be able to move into the future. And when you ask what is possible, it can open up some new ideas as opposed to what do you want or how can we resolve this? It's like, well, what's possible? It's a little more open. And then the next question is, you know, what next action step makes the most sense? So like when you're facilitating at the end of a session and you want to make sure people's next steps are clear for when you're not in the room, you get into that in when you're helping people through conflict, or if you're in a conflict yourself, you want to not stay stuck in, I hate this person. You want to think about, well, what would make sense to actually do? And so then like to kind of start to tie this together, I wanted to talk about, you know, when we're in conflict, there's a lot of stress. And we might get into that point where we're thinking, this person is crazy or I hate them. But the way to interrupt that is by calling on our own empathy, thinking about their perspective, considering this next question that I love, what would make them think, say, or do that? Just assuming that they're as cool a person as you are, just assuming it. What could possibly be going on for them? We have a lot of things going on in the chat. There's more questions that I haven't read. Brian, do you have a handle on that?
I've been keeping an eye. So a question about neutrality from Kelly. In some conflicts, aggrieved, traumatized individuals will feel like there is no neutral, or neutrality equals complicity in what harmed me. Any advice for dealing with this dynamic as a facilitator?
That is an incredibly wonderful question. And I think there's not an easy answer for it. I can't help but think about it as a mediator, in which case the neutrality question can, I can attempt to explain it in a very black and white way that usually puts people at ease, which is that I don't have any skin in the game. I'm not, you know, whatever you all decide is the outcome doesn't matter to me, right? I don't care if this person gets paid or if that person defends themselves. I don't care if these two co-leaders of a company decide that they really can't get along and so they're going to sell, or one person's going to buy the other one out. Like, I don't have any way to, there's no reason that that matters to me. On the other hand, when you think about things like from a restorative justice point of view, like Donna had mentioned that she does RJ practice, and I don't know if there's anyone else here who does, it is more of that perspective of there are structural power dynamics whereby certain groups of people are more harmed than others. And how do you remedy that? And you know, there may be reasons in a mediation where somebody looks at me as a white woman and says, I'm not listening to you. You're never going to be neutral. And that's their right. And they can say, okay, well, then I'm not going to be your mediator because you can't believe that I'm neutral. And I'm okay with that, right? Like, I'm not going to seem neutral to everybody. I've done mediations where I'm certain that I am not being trusted. And it's not about race. It's actually because I'm a woman. And I think, you know, if there were a male mediator here, he might make more headway than me. And unfortunately, the outcome there is that I'm not helping them get to an agreement. So they're choosing to do something else with that conflict.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that's helpful, Kelly.
Kelly?
Yeah, no, I appreciate this discussion because I think it's neutrality is a very nuanced idea. It's a super nuanced idea. And if a facilitator's main charge is to help a group accomplish something or get unstuck, I think the mantle of neutrality can sometimes be an obstacle to that, as well as a really important catalyst for that. And so I mean, I don't have any magic answers. I'm just interested in how other people grapple with the dilemma. So I appreciate your thoughts.
And another interesting thing to know is mediators have a specific code of ethics. And if I, as a mediator, am feeling like there's a too much of a power differential between these folks, and I can't do anything to equalize that, then it would be unethical for me to continue with the mediation. And so mediations are always voluntary, including for the mediator to be able to say, no, we're not doing this. So that's another aspect of that neutrality. It's yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the mediation piece unless people have questions about it, but there are some founding principles that I haven't even talked about that we can consider.
There is something really interesting that's happening in chat, and I'd like to go ahead and surface it. And Lori and David Matthew Pryor, I'd like to invite you to go off mute if that's at all possible. So David had said, assume positive intent. That triggers me sometimes as it can be conflict avoidant. And then Lori said something that was real juicy. In a meeting the other day, a client asked for a ground rule, quote, no using assume good intent, close quote, as a weapon. Lori, I would love to hear what was going on there if you're in a place where you could talk about it. And if not, that's okay. We can get back to you. David, do you mind saying a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it a lot in the coaching space, and all this positive psychology, appreciative inquiry is great. And I've seen people get almost like an elixir, that it's all this positivity that they assume positive intent. They put that out in front before we even start the meeting. And therefore what it does is it shuts down people from actually being critical or having conflict sometimes. And so they're like, listen, David, assume positive intent, and it's like a control thing. So I think it's really interesting when I see it, and it's very implicit, and it's the kind of dark side of this that happens in spaces with teams.
Gina, any thoughts on that one?
So this is a space where I would think going back to specific issues is the most important thing, and talking to people about conflict, whether you're using maybe it's the TKI model, maybe it's not, but emphasizing that we can get really good things from disagreement. And there's a very big difference between having a disagreement on the issue and going into personal attack mode, right? So, and I actually found Laura's comment in the chat. I'm curious about whether someone offered up the ground rule, assume good intent, and they offered up that as the ground rule as a weapon, or if the ground rule that was offered was, can we not say assume good intent as a weapon? Because it can absolutely be weaponized. Lots of things can be weaponized. We're tremendously creative beings, right? As humans, like we can weaponize lots of stuff. So I think there's a difference. I also don't love assume good intent. I recognize that it can be useful, but in some ways, the question I offered earlier of, well, assume the person is just as wonderful as you are for a moment, what could make them behave that way? Like that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? But I never said a word about intentions.
Yeah, we don't know people's intentions. We can't, can't know them.
Unless they want to share them, which is usually not the case.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Yeah, I like Mateo's comment about task conflict versus interpersonal conflict. Yeah, so sometimes to maintain neutrality in a mediation, I'll do a lot of reframing, right? Words are being used that are very, very, very loaded. And like I said earlier, in terms of the question around facts, right? I'm looking for that kernel of truth that I can present in a neutral way. Yeah, we can move on. I think the next thing really to get into is talking about group dynamics, which I think everyone's eager to get into.
This is one mine are yours, Gina.
Well, this was mine, but you're about to get into group dynamics for us. Here we go.
I'll go ahead and hit that then. And
there
so, thank you very much. So this is another framework that you can pull in, and really, rather than a framework, this is more of a principle. And so, what I like to do sometimes is to prep people for a conflict if I sense one's going to come out, like from my stakeholder interviews or just my prep for the meeting, and I'll actually introduce this one as a principle right at the very beginning of the meeting. And so this is one where you can take a flip chart and you draw something that looks like this. And I'm going to need some audience participation on this one from you all because you need to fill in the gaps. You can say, oftentimes a group process is a lot like being on the roller coaster. So let's assume for a second that you're on the front end of this roller coaster and your condition is that you're looking forward, but you really can't see what's over the hill. So if you would just go ahead and go off mute for me and call out what are some of the emotions that come up when you're in this place on the roller coaster. Go ahead and go off mute. Give me some words. Chris?
Anticipation.
Okay, what else?
Excitement.
Excitement.
Impending doom.
Impending doom. Okay.
Fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown. Okay, what else?
Nausea.
Nausea. Okay. Nausea. Thanks for giving me a word I'm not actually sure I can spell. Is there another U?
Anxiety and confusion.
Good one. So anxiety, confusion.
Worrying that someone else in the car is going to freak out.
Okay. So someone else will freak out.
Worrying that I'm going to freak out.
The worry about freak out. Cool. And that happens when we're sometimes at the front end of a process. It's like we're just getting into this thing. We don't know where it's going. And I can't see the ultimate destination. Then we get to the top of this roller coaster. And this is the moment where you're looking out and you see the trees and the parking lot below you. And if you look really carefully, you can see where you parked way off there in the distance at the amusement park. And so when you have that visibility, when you have that perspective, again, what are some of the emotions that come up for you?
That's the point at which I get excited. I'm like, look at everything I can see.
Now we're excited. Okay, what else is going on?
Oh, crap.
Oh, crap. Okay, what else?
Regret.
Regret. Amazing. What else?
I can't go back.
Can't go back. I'm stuck. Okay. What else? What are some of the other emotions that pop up for you? You can see where it's going, but anything?
No control, lack of control.
No control. Okay. And then we get into that moment. And by the way, this is a range of emotions, right? Some people are excited. Some people are like, there's no control here. And then we get into that moment where we're careening down the hill at 90 miles an hour, right? And there's that one guy that's like got his hands up and is screaming. Everybody's screaming. And then there's the other one that's just gripping on for dear life as they're zipping down this thing. So what are the emotions that you're feeling there?
This can't last forever, and it won't.
Can't last, and it won't. What else?
Out of control.
Exhilaration, out of control. What else?
Almost there.
Okay, out of control.
Fun.
Fun, almost there. Anything else?
I'm gonna die.
I'm gonna die. Can't believe I did this thing. Okay, and then we come to the end where we're just rolling kind of slow back into the station or whatever it's called, you know. And what's the emotion that we're feeling there?
Do it again.
Do it again, or what's the other one?
Can I get out of
Never
this
again.
car?
Never again.
Relief.
Yeah.
Again, and there's relief. What else? Anything else in here?
I hope nobody sees my knees knocking.
Okay, knocking knees. Yeah. And so what you can do is you can just exactly the same way that I did this. You can do this with a blank piece of paper, is that you sketch this thing out. And so you draw that out for people and say, you know, there are going to be times where you are going to experience each one of these things. There are going to be moments where it's like, I don't know where we're going, but I'm not sure I want to be on this crazy train. There are going to be moments where you can see where you're going and you're not sure that you're going to want to be on it. And then there's going to be some moments of high energy. And either you're going to be thinking, this is out of control or this is fun. And then there are going to be moments where we get to the end of it where you're either going to want to do it again or never going to do it again. But throughout this process that we've designed, understand that we're going to have each one of these things happen to us. And so from time to time, I'm going to point back to this poster that we have now, and I'm going to ask you to take stock. Where are we in the process? And what does that mean for you and your emotions? And if you don't like where you are, what do you need to do for yourself in order to move to a place where you want to be? Okay. All right. So that's the principle of the roller coaster. And again, just this is a flip chart and a marker, and you can sketch this up. Any questions or comments about this one? David, I notice you're off mute. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I really like this because it's metaphorical, it's visual, but it also it allows everyone to be where they're at. So even if people have conflicting emotions in different spaces, and like even if at the beginning, the top, the end, it really gives a whole process validation to everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, you just reminded me of something, David. This is just for you all. This is just for Nova Scribes, but and just for my facilitator buddies. This actually maps out almost perfectly to divergence, convergence,
Uh-huh.
and the groan zone.
Uh.
If you're familiar with that, okay. And then there's that safety and that closure at the end that happens, but it maps almost exactly to the divergence convergence model. Okay. All right, let me copy this and then I think we can move on.
Well, moving on is audience choice, right? We're getting into choose your own adventure now. Oh no, wait, did you want to talk about gradients of agreement?
We could.
Well, choose your own adventure. We could go there.
Well, we have a couple of experts in the room. Let me say this. Would you like to do gradients of agreement, or should we move on? Is there anybody who's would really couldn't sleep at night if we didn't do gradients of agreement? Because I also notice what time it is. Is there anybody who really wants to do it? Let me see a show of hands. Ludi wants to do it. Okay. So Ludi, here's what I'm going to do.
Kelly.
I'm just going to, and Kelly. Okay. So I'm just going to do a light touch then on the gradients of agreement. This is, and by the way, this particular version that I'm using, it is from the Grove Consultants, and we've got Lori Durnell with us. So I'm a little sheepish about actually teaching this with her in the room, but we'll do it anyway. So this comes from Sam Kaner and his book, The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. Maybe if I can ask one of my friends to drop that as a link in the reference in chat. That to me, it's like one of the foundational books of facilitation. It's a must read. What this does is that it gets people out of discussion and into decision. What you're doing is that you're pushing people out of inquiry and to advocacy to really see where do we stand. And so here's how this goes. One is wholehearted endorsement. I love this idea, best idea ever. Love the people that came up with it even more. This idea is the one for me. A 2 is an agreement with a minor point of contention. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. That works. A 3 is I support it with reservations. It's I can live with this. Now the key word here is support. I am not going to go off and talk smack about this after the fact. I can support this thing. I'll get back to 4 and 5 in just a second. Let me skip ahead to 6. So 6, 7, 8 are more on the negative side. 6 is I don't like it, but I will support it. It's not great, but I don't want to hold up the group. Now, this one's important because I am speaking my dissension in the meeting. But if I'm calling a 6, what that means is that I disagree with it here, but if the group decides that they're going to go in this direction, then once the meeting ends, I'm going to support this thing. I'm not going to, again, leave this meeting and then talk smack about the idea. I will support it. A 7 is serious disagreement. I am not on board with this. Don't count me in. And an 8 is a veto. This is a hard no. This is one step before I am turning in my resignation over this thing. I am so opposed to it. Now let me get back to 4 and 5. A 4 is an abstain. This issue doesn't affect me. I have no ink in the squid. I have no hat on this cattle. This one's not for me. Okay. For whatever reason, this is not my issue. Now, if you get a lot of people that are calling a 4, there's a couple of things that could be going on. It could be that you've got the wrong participant list. It could be that the outcomes of the meeting, that this particular issue is not relevant to a lot of people that are there, in which case you got to take a look at your attendees. It could also be that there is not trust in the room, or there's not enough trust in the room such that people feel comfortable taking a stand either for or against. That could be an indicator of either one of those things. A 5 is more discussion is needed. I don't understand this issue well enough. So, and by the way, this is after we've discussed this thing. We've done something like the 4 ways of seeing or any of the other techniques, and now it's time to actually move forward to make a decision. If you get a 5, that's where we go back to the person that called a 5, and you say, hey, Gina, I noticed that you said that more discussion was needed. What specifically do you need to hear so that you can either move for or against this thing? So we're not blowing this open to a large group discussion again. It is a specific call for a specific piece of information such that the people that called a 5 can either vote for or against this one. This one's really easy to do virtually. You can either use it in Google Slides like this and have people just drop dots around, or you can have people just type their number into chat, in which case you could take a look at it. But again, this is a great way of moving people from inquiry to advocacy. Okay. Questions, comments about this one before we move on? Okay, cool. So Gina, choose your own adventure.
Cool. So we wanted to sort of let you pick where we end here, right? We have about 10 minutes left. There's lots of more things we can do. We can keep doing more visual metaphors. We can do more conflict frameworks. I can get into some of the tools I teach people about that really focus largely on managing your own emotions when you're either need to be neutral with big giant scare quotes, or you're in a conflict, or if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more about mediation specifically. I've referenced a specific process. I can explain what that is. Do we want to do show of hands and or drop your ABC into the chat? A is I would throw it to Brian for more riffing on frameworks. B is Gina, we want tools specifically on managing emotions. C is I do want to hear from Gina, but I'm curious about mediation.
Okay, so I'm seeing some stuff come in. Let's give it just a minute.
And I've got a B to me too.
And if somebody who's better at math. Oh, look at that. Lauren's got a D. She says breakouts and do both.
Well, yeah, because it looks like it's mostly A and B.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I see one C, which I'm happy to have you contact me separately and we can chat about mediation anytime.
Okay. So why don't we do that then? Let's I'm going to start up some breakouts. Is there anybody who could not live at night could not sleep at night, excuse me, if we were to break into 2 separate breakouts and we can go in 2 different directions? Does that sound good? Thumbs up. All right. So I'm going to get the breakout starting. The recording is going to end. Why don't we just go ahead and do the end of the recording here, and then we'll go ahead and jump into breakouts. So as we're ending the recording, can I have everybody give Gina a big hand, say thank you very much. Yay, Gina, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. You're awesome. Love Nova Scribes.